Welcome to video 4 of Topic 6 IB Biology Human Physiology. In this unit, we are going to look at gaseous exchange. Okay, so the overarching essential idea for this unit is that the lungs are actively ventilated to ensure that gas exchange can occur passively. So thinking of those terms, active, okay, so requiring energy, and passive, not requiring energy. So we're going to look further into this. What is occurring to allow the lungs to be ventilated and how gaseous exchange actually occurs. In terms of your nature of science, we actually link back to a unit of 1.8 here. So we're looking at obtaining evidence for theories, and we're looking at those studies that have contributed to the development of our understandings around the causes of cancers. Okay, and we're going to look specifically in this unit at lung cancer as we are looking at the breathing system. Okay, so let's go back to year 8, sorry, and the basics of breathing. Okay, so up until this stage, you might have said inhalation and exhalation. And when you inhale, we know that the diaphragm moves down, the rib cage expands. Okay, so we get that bigger body cavity to pull that air in. And then when we exhale, the diaphragm relaxes and moves up. The rib cage gets smaller and that air is then forced out, being exhaling. Okay, just a few more basics. Here is the actual anatomy of our breathing system. So you've got your windpipe, which is called the trachea. You have then two bronchi, you've got bronchioles and your diaphragm, and we're going to look a bit more detail at the bronchioles, which come off the bronchus, and the alveoli in this unit. We will look at each section of the breathing system as well, just remembering that windpipe has circular rings of cartilage to keep it open all the time. The windpipe can't close, otherwise obviously breathing can't occur. Now, before we go any further, it's probably really important to remember why breathing or ventilation needs to occur. And that is so that intake of air, so the oxygen can be removed from it to be used in the process of respiration. Okay, so the ventilation is the way that the body obtains oxygen for respiration, and it's also a way that the body expels waste, the waste from metabolism, the waste from respiration. Okay, so your first understanding. Air is carried to the lungs via the trachea and bronchi, and then goes to the alveoli via the bronchioles. So we've got a diagram here, a bit more in depth than the one we saw earlier. And we can see the trachea with those cartilage rings running down the center. You see the rib cage and those intercostal muscles between each rib. Okay, you see the trachea then splits into two bronchi, which then split further into the bronchioles, and we've got those alveoli on the end, which they say look like cauliflower or broccoli. Realistically, that you're talking microscopic at these stages. They're very, very small. If you actually cut through some lung tissue, you can see the little holes as such, but you really can't see that cauliflower effect on the alveolus when you just look at them. You can see the heart's very close there. We understand now our circulatory systems and the relationship between the ventilation system and the circulation system. The diaphragm at the base there, and we've got some different membranes and stuff also included in that diagram. Okay, so thinking about the airways, air enters via the nose or the mouth, so you can breathe through your mouth or through your nose. It's better to breathe through your nose. You've got a better filtering system set there. So it then the air passes down the trachea. The trachea then divides into 2 bronchi. Each bronchus leads to a lung. These are split then into the bronchioles within the lungs, which have alveoli on the end. Okay, muscle contractions cause the pressure changes inside the thorax. So the thorax is that body cavity area that forces the air in and out of the lungs to ventilate them. So you really see in there how the diaphragm pulls down, the lungs pull out, and that forces the air in, and then the diaphragm pushes up, the lungs relax in, and that forces the air out. So you'll also see the terms inspiration and expiration, okay, which is inspiration is another term for inhalation, expiration is exhaling. So just different terminology that you may see. All right, different muscles are required for inspiration and expiration because muscles only do work when they contract. So basically, so when the diaphragm contracts, it will do work, okay? So it will then pull down and it's active. However, when it's relaxing, something else needs to help it to push up, okay? It's not going to push up. That's what we're going to look at, these muscle pairs, antagonistic muscles. All right, before we get going, let's just think of some basics of physics. Okay, and we're thinking about pressure and volume here, okay? And we're thinking a bit about diffusion as well. So gases will always move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So the diagram on the left there, you can see high concentration on the very left-hand side, and you can see a lower concentration on the right-hand side. And over time, you see the particles from the left-hand side have mixed on the right-hand side to cause that diffusion that diffusion has occurred because you've got that concentration gradient. Now, you can increase the number of particles by increasing the pressure. Okay, so you can have a look at the left-hand side. You've got low pressure where you've got full space, okay, and then it's been squashed down, and because the particles have got less space, they're under a higher pressure, okay? On the far right, you've got more particles in there under a higher pressure. All righty, so it's important to just be aware of this concept of diffusion and the concept of pressure when we're thinking about the lungs. Okay, so let's think ventilation. Remember what I've just spoken about in terms of diffusion and pressure, okay? Inspiration, so inhaling, breathing in, the rib cage expands. The diaphragm pulls down. Pressure within the thorax, so the lung area, decreases and is now less than atmospheric pressure. So air is now drawn into the lungs. Okay, we've got a pressure difference, so air is drawn in. Expiration, so now we're going to breathe out. The rib cage contracts. The diaphragm pushes up. Pressure in the thorax increases above the atmospheric pressure outside, and air is then expelled from the lung. Okay, so thinking of that a bit further now, let's have a think of what's really happening with some of these muscles. Okay, now muscles can either be contracting or relaxing. They become shorter when they contract, okay? And by contracting, they then exert this pulling force. Now, when a muscle relaxes, it does the opposite, okay? So it lengthens. Relaxing is a passive process, okay? So it's not that no energy is used for the muscle to relax, it just relaxes out. Muscles that work together as a pair or in groups are called antagonistic muscles. The diaphragm and muscles in the wall of the abdomen are antagonistic, so they're going to work as a pair. And in the rib cage, the internal intercostal and external intercostal muscles are antagonistic, so they work as pairs. Alrighty, so let's have a look at this. All right, so inhalation or inspiration, our muscles contract. So diaphragm and rib cage are contracting. But remember, we said there's those antagonistic muscles. Okay, so when one thing's contracting, its pair is relaxing. So this diagram itself is just talking about the intercostal muscles, internal, and the diaphragm here. Let's look at that a bit further. Alrighty, so we've got a table and we're going to be looking at inspiration and expiration for each of these things. So we've got the diaphragm, first of all. When you inhale, it moves down and flattens. When you exhale, it moves up and becomes domed. We're going to look at all of this in a bit more detail, but let's get the basics first. The rib cage, when you breathe in, moves up and out. When you exhale, it moves down and inwards. So let's think about what's happening with diaphragm and rib cage. Breathe in, and often put your hands on your rib cage and do this. Breathe in. So that diaphragm moves down and flattens, and the rib cage has moved up and out. You've made a big cavity in your chest space, in the thorax there. Breathe out, and you feel that rib cage move down and inwards, and the diaphragm moves up and down, so pushes that air out. So what's changing in terms of volume? When you breathe in, the volume within your thorax increases, and when you breathe out, the volume within your thorax decreases. The change in pressure, okay, so when you breathe in, you have a decrease in pressure, and when you breathe out, you increase the pressure in your thorax. Alrighty, already said that about the diaphragm, but we say it again. Let's think of the movement then, okay? So we're looking now at the diaphragm and those abdominal walls. So we're thinking these two antagonistic muscles, the diaphragm and the walls of the abdomen, okay, down low. So the diaphragm, when we breathe in, the diaphragm contracts, okay, and it's moving down. It's making that bigger space in your thorax. All right, now the walls of the abdomen, they've relaxed to allow the diaphragm to move down. Okay, so they've relaxed and given this space for the diaphragm to move down. When you breathe out, the diaphragm then relaxes and moves up. But to push the diaphragm up, the abdominal muscles have then, and those abdominal organs, okay, they've contracted, and it's pushing the organs and all that area up to push up that relaxing diaphragm. All right, so now we're thinking movement of the rib cage, and we're thinking of those external intercostal muscles and the internal intercostal muscles. So when we breathe in, the external intercostal muscles, breathing in, they've contracted and pulled their rib cage up and outwards, whilst the intercostals have relaxed. And we breathe out. The external intercostals have relaxed, and the internals have contracted to pull the rib cage inwards and downwards. Okay, your next understanding. Ventilation maintains concentration gradient of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the air in the alveoli and the blood flowing in the adjacent capillaries. So we've looked at how that inspiration occurs, how we get that air to the alveoli. Okay, we've looked at the structure, we've looked at the mechanics. Now we're in the alveoli and we've got air. And around the alveolus, we've got lots of capillaries carrying blood. Okay, and what's going to be occurring across the alveolus is gaseous exchange. Okay, you've got oxygen moving from the air in the alveolus into the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide moving out of the capillaries. Okay, so you've got concentration gradients which allow these two gases to diffuse in and out of the bloodstream. So let's really have a look at what's going on. So in the alveolus, this is where gaseous exchange occurs. Capillaries surround all those walls. When we get to do a lung dissection, you'll see it's very rich, okay, because there's so many capillaries. Gases diffuse across the thin membranes. Okay, it's very, very thin, and we're going to look at the different cells that are involved with this. So we have a concentration gradient to allow this diffusion to move. Okay, so the air in the alveolus has a higher concentration of oxygen than the capillaries, because the capillaries, it's been used out the blood already around at different organs, okay, for respiration. So the oxygen is going to move to an area of a lower concentration, so it diffuses across the membrane into the capillary. Whereas the carbon dioxide is at a higher concentration in the capillaries because it's a waste product from respiration, and therefore diffuses back into the alveolus. All right, so this is where we're going to look at the cells that are involved in that diffusion. So we call these pneumocytes, okay, and they're extremely thin alveolar cells that are adapted to carry out the gaseous exchange. So first of all, we're looking at type 1s, and if you look in the diagram, you can see our type 1 alveolar cell, it says. That's our pneumocyte just on the edge there. Let's have a look in a bit more detail. So in this diagram here, you can see our type 1 pneumocyte in the center there. But it's any of those thin cells around the alveolus, okay? You've got type 2s, which look like they're little brushes. They've got cilia on the end. And then the thinner ones are your type 1s. So these are most of the alveolus epithelium cells, epithelium being the layer. It's a single layer thick. They flatten with a thickness of approximately 0.15 micrometers of a cytoplasm. Okay, so if you look closely, you can see they're very, very thin cells. Right, let's move on, and we're going to have to look at the type 2s now. So these secrete a solution containing a surfactant that creates a moist surface inside the alveoli to prevent the sides of the alveolus adhering to each other by reducing surface tension. So you want to ensure that you've always got this open sac, okay? And you've got air moving in and out. You can't have it drying up, otherwise it will start to stick together. So we've got these type 2, which secrete surfactants out, okay? So these are rounded cells that occupy about 5% of the alveolar surface area. They secrete fluid in which lines the alveolus. This allows oxygen to dissolve and then diffuse into the bloodstream, allows carbon dioxide to evaporate from it, and it just stops that sticking occurring. Alrighty, moving on to our applications and skills now. And first of all, we're looking at the causes and consequences of lung cancer. Now, I have taken this straight from 1.8 because it links directly with 1.8, where we looked at the formations of cancers. Specifically here, we are looking at lung cancer. So that tumour being that abnormal group of cells that develops at any stage of a life in any part of the body. We are looking here at lung cancer. If these abnormal cells adhere to each other and do not invade other tissues or move to other parts of the body, then they're classified as benign. However, if those cells start to attach and spread elsewhere, they're classified as malignant. Now, in your lung cancers, we'll see shortly, they can start off as one nodule, but then moves as the different stages move on. The development of a secondary malignant growth away from the site of the original growth is known as metastasis. So that's what I was just saying. You get your one site and then it moves on to another site, and that's metastasis. Diseases that due to malignant tumours are commonly known as cancers. So Cancer has many diverse causes, and we've now looked at them as we've moved through our topics. Okay, chemicals and agents that cause cancers are known as carcinogens. Carcinomonas are the malignant tumours caused by the carcinogens. Okay, things that are mutagens are carcinogenic, so things that cause mutations to the genetic code. See how it's all coming together now? So things like viruses, X-rays, UV rays, many chemicals. Okay, mutagens cause gene mutations, which we know all about now. Mutations can cause cancer. Remembering that radiation should be on that list as well, which many chemicals could class it as that. And UV rays should be UV rays. Certain chemicals can also increase the risk of metastasis, so that spread of the cancer. Okay, as we know, mutations are random changes to our base sequence of genes. Not all gene mutations lead to cancers. The genes that lead to cancer, if mutated, are called oncogenes. Oncogenes regulate the cell cycle, and if mutated, the cell cycle gets out of control, and that is why our tumours are formed. Okay, so smoking and cancer. So smoking being one of the causes of lung cancer. There is a correlation between smoking and the incidence of cancer. And you can see that there in our diagrams, in our graphs. Now, this is a random graph that I've found, but it's good. It does show us different people. Okay, it is American, but that's fine. And it's showing the age and the rate of lung cancer. Okay, and it's looking at people who have smoked a certain amount of cigarettes a day. Sorry, it's cut off two of the graphs, but look, it shows, you can see the correlation. All right, a correlation is when there's a relationship between two variables. Positive correlation, as one variable increases, the other increases. So we can see we've got a positive correlation here. A negative correlation is where one variable increases and the other decreases. So looking at these graphs, do you think that smoking and cancer has a positive or a negative correlation? It would have helped if your teacher just didn't answer that question. All right, application, causes and consequences of emphysema. So there is a new condition for you to learn about. Emphysema then. Now, during emphysema, the alveoli are replaced by a smaller number of larger air sacs. Just have a look over on the right-hand side there. You've got a healthy alveolus, and you see at the bottom there, there is a joining, like the alveolus merge together as such. So you get these larger air sacs. The air sacs then also develop thicker walls. Now, because the air sacs have got bigger, the surface area for gaseous exchange has then reduced. Remember, you need lots of smaller sacs to have a bigger surface area. If you get a large sac, then you've reduced that surface area for gaseous exchange to occur. Now, also because the walls have got thicker, the distance for gaseous exchange to occur has increased. So there is now a big problem because less gaseous exchange can occur and it takes longer for it to occur. On the diagram, you'll see it says COPD. Now, this is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. This is an umbrella term of which emphysema is part of. Okay, so quite a few of the diagrams and that you see here will say COPD. That's just because it's the umbrella term as such. Now, also, because those lung walls have got thicker, they become less elastic. Okay, so when you breathe in and out, the lungs are increasing and decreasing. Now, with emphysema, the lungs can't do that. Okay, so the person becomes quite restricted in their breathing. Now, if we think of a healthy lung, we've got phagocytosis inside the alveoli that normally prevent lung infections. And what they do is they produce this enzyme called electase to break down any bacteria. Okay, so this is happening in a nice healthy lung. Now, research has shown that it could be this elactase, which is a type of protease, so it's breaking down the proteins in the bacteria that could cause our emphysema. Okay, now in a healthy lung, you've got this enzyme inhibitor, alpha-1 antitrypsin, which is known as A1AT, so that's what I shall call it, which presents the lactase and other proteases that could be in the lungs from digesting liver tissue, because liver tissue is protein, remember. So in a healthy lung, there's this balance. You've got the lactase to break down bacteria, but you've got the enzyme inhibitor to ensure that the lactase doesn't attack the liver, lung tissue. That should say lung tissue. Okay, inside a smoker's lung, the number of phagocytes increases. Therefore, we've got more lactase being produced. These lactase, so these proteases, then digest the lung tissue. So that's what makes those alveolar sacs increase, because it's breaking down the walls between them. Now, there are also some genetic factors that affect the quantity of the A1AT enzyme inhibitor that's produced in the lungs. So there's two. Emphysema is a very newly researched area. So two ways that they know that the tissue is attacked as such. That is either through the lactase, so having more of that than attacking the tissue of the lungs, or not having the inhibitor to inhibit the enzyme. So the exact dynamics behind it all, still to be found. There's a future for you lot there. All right, the effects of emphysema. So if you imagine, the lungs can't increase in size easily because they're now much more rigid. There is less surface area for gaseous exchange to occur, and for the diffusion across the membranes, it now takes longer. So we now have a low oxygen saturation in the blood. So imagine the side effects of low oxygen in the blood, okay? There's also high carbon dioxide concentrations in the blood. The person would have low energy, shortness of breath, and in chronic and acute cases are going to need assisted ventilation, so oxygen, ventilators and things like that. It really is quite a debilitating disease. Alrighty, so your next application, external and internal intercostal muscles and the diaphragm and abdominal muscles are examples of antagonistic muscles in action, and we have looked at all of this in our understandings. Okay, so looking at those groups of antagonistic muscles, so your diaphragm and your abdomen muscles, and then the two different intercostal muscles working together to allow inspiration and expiration to occur. We also have practical 6 here, and this is where we monitor ventilation in humans at rest and after vigorous exercise. I wonder if you can think of some investigations you could do in this area to be able to investigate that. We will do more of that in the classroom. Alrighty, so if we look at our list of understandings, applications and skills and think back to that key idea that the lungs are actively ventilated to ensure that gaseous exchange can occur passively, I would say we have covered everything nicely on our list. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.